Welcome to the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, where we have open and honest conversations about co-parenting, separation, divorce, and the hardest question of all, should you stay or should you go? I'm Kate Anthony, your divorce survival guide, and I'm here to help you navigate some of the roughest waters you've ever swum in and answer some of your toughest questions. I've been to hell and back, and now it's my mission in life to help you get to the other side of this process with your sanity and your heart intact. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, Home Edition. You might hear birds chirping in the background because I have a huge bush and tree outside my house that has a lot of birds in it. And I'm not recording in a booth. So there you have it. I mean, hell, if they can do it on SNL, I can do it on the podcast, right? So, how's everyone doing? Quarantine. It's been really interesting. One of the things that we realized this week was that my pod, really, like not my podcast, but my pod, my quarantine pod is really made up of my ex-husband and his wife, our kids, and then by extension, my ex-husband's wife's ex-husband, because all of our kids are sort of rotating through these three houses. There's another house too, but we don't count that. Long story. We decided yesterday for Easter to have Easter dinner together. Now, we only did this because we know that we've all been super, super, super careful. Like my ex-husband's wife's ex-husband, he had been traveling internationally. He came home. He self-quarantined for 2 weeks, didn't see his son, didn't see anybody for 2 weeks. And, so those are the measures that the entire family has been taking. And we have these kids going back and forth and around and about. And we just thought, you know what? We can't see anybody else. We may as well see each other. So yesterday was Easter. When I'm recording this on Monday. You're probably going to hear it on Tuesday or whenever. But anyway, it was Easter yesterday in my timeline. And so we all went over to my ex's for dinner. The 4 grown-ups, the 2 exes and the 2 current. I mean, it was, and from the outside, it's really weird and crazy and like, what the hell? But you know what, guys? On the inside, it was great. It was great. We had so much fun. We've all known each other for a really long time. Our kids all went to preschool together. So we've known each other for a good, we've known each other since before any of us got divorced. So a good 12 years, I think. And so it was fun. It was fun. All of us were just super excited to see other people. We're just super excited to be in the company of other people. However, whatever our past and our history may be, it was really exciting. And I will say that we are, lest you think that you're going to jump right into this, we are all a good long time into our divorces. We have processed through so much. We have really gotten to a point where this is possible. And, this may not be possible for everybody ever. This may not be possible for you right now. But I just want to say that the work that we do in my programs, the work that I do with my clients, the work that there is to be done in the world where you really get to process through your shit and your resentments and take responsibility for your part and release and forgive, right? This is what's possible on the other side of that work. All of that work will facilitate and perhaps bring you closer to being able to have Easters in the future that look something like mine did yesterday, or Christmases or Thanksgivings or whatever, right? If you don't do the work, there's not much hope for that, for your future. And you may not want that, and that's fine. Right? And like I said, it may not be possible, it may not be appropriate for you to have this kind of relationship. And that's totally fine too, by the way, literally totally fine. I mean, if your safety, emotional, physical safety is at risk here, don't even think about this. But if there is a way for your kids to eventually so for you guys to get to this place so that your kids can sort of see this and experience this. And by the way, our kids think it's like the most normal thing in the world. Like it's not even weird for them. If that's what you want, the work is available to you. And that is what I do with my private clients. That is what I do in my programs. If this is important to you, I'm here for you. 100% here for you. So that's what I wanted to say about that. And now, shifting gears to today's episode. Today I have Andrea Vacca. Andrea is the owner of Vacca Family Law Group. It's a law firm in Manhattan that focuses exclusively on non-adversarial divorce and family law matters. So Andrea focuses on collaborative divorce. After practicing traditional litigation-focused family law for many years, Andrea's firm now works only with clients who want to keep their divorces out of court and want their prenuptial and postnuptial agreements negotiated in a non-adversarial manner. Now, we talk a lot about collaborative divorce, and I just want to specify that this is a very specific form of divorce. This is not it's not a general term for doing things in a collaborative manner. It's actually a very specific divorce process. And so, here on the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, the month of April is legal month, and we're doing all things legal and financial too at the end of the month. And so, last week we had Susan Guthrie on talking about mediation. And so today we're talking with Andrea Vacca about collaborative divorce. This is actually the kind of divorce that I had. I went through a collaborative process. So Andrea regularly lectures, writes, and blogs on the topics of collaborative law, mediation, and topics related to non-adversarial family law. So she is a great resource for understanding how this process works. Without further ado, I bring to you my conversation with Andrea Vacca. Andrea Vacca, thank you so much for coming on to have this great conversation about collaborative divorce. I'm so excited.
I'm so excited, Kate. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So, let's just dive in. I mean, the biggest question on the table is, what the hell is collaborative divorce?
What the hell is collaborative divorce? All right. Well, it's a divorce process that is more formal than just a typical negotiation. And it is a process where both clients have their own attorney. And each attorney represents their individual client and advocates for them. But the difference is they're advocating in a way that's not adversarial. They're not threatening each other, negotiating under duress. We're really trying to bring our clients to an agreement in a way that meets both of your interests. So in the collaborative process, each client has their own attorney, and it's a team approach to divorce. So there are other professionals that will be part of the process as well. There's the collaborative coach. In some places, we call them family specialists or divorce coaches, and they usually come from a mental health background. They're psychologists or masters of social work, marriage and family therapists. And then there's a financial professional as well. So the financial professional is usually neutral. And this team forms around the couple to address their legal, financial, and emotional communication needs so that none of those hijack the other and we can come to an agreement.
Yes, that's great. Now, just for full disclosure, I did collaborative divorce. Just so that everybody knows, because I think I've talked about it a bunch of times on the podcast. And so I did a collaborative divorce, and we actually only had one attorney. What do you think? How did that happen?
I don't know. That sounds more like maybe mediation.
No, it was definitely collaborative. We had the whole team. We also shared a coach. But I think that what was decided was that because we were already coming to the table so collaboratively that they were like, you could have two, but you could also just save money and do one. And we were like, let's do that. I mean, that might be.
That's not your typical way of doing collaborative. So maybe you
did it wrong.
Unique and different. I don't know.
We did it wrong. It's null and void. We have to do it again.
California. We're different in New York. I guess.
We do things our own way.
Well, typically you're each going to have your own lawyer. I've never had a collaborative case where there weren't two lawyers, but but you get the team approach. You understand that.
You do, and I think that's so what is the difference between collaborative and mediation? Obviously, besides the fact there are two attorneys normally. So what's the difference between collaborative and mediation? Because I think that's always the confusion.
Yeah, a lot of people have heard about mediation and they're never quite sure what the difference is. So mediation is a process where there's one mediator who could be a lawyer or could be from another type of professional background. And that mediator is meeting with the couple individually. When I mediate, the lawyers are not typically in the room. So let's assume just the couple comes to my office and I help them through all the different issues that they need to address so that they can come to a final agreement around all the financial issues, the child-related issues, the spousal support, child support issues, taxes, insurance, everything. We cover everything. And by the end, I'm able to draft an agreement that they can then review with their own attorneys. And the attorneys will provide feedback and they have a representation. Sometimes they get consulting attorneys, or the attorneys actually might jump in a little bit and give advice and ask for ways for the agreement to be changed. But the attorneys are outside the mediation room. Mm-hmm. And so the mediator just helps them come to this agreement. And then at the end, they're legally separated by the time the mediation is over. Collaborative is different because you have the two attorneys in the room at all times during all of the meetings.
And the coach, right?
Right.
And the financial professional.
So it sounds really expensive, right? With all these professionals.
Right. And often a parenting coach, right? There's often a parenting specialist as well as the regular coach, right?
So where I work in New York and in Manhattan and all over New York, the divorce coach, who's also called sometimes a family specialist, sometimes they have child specialist background, they will handle everything. They will handle the communication issues, the emotional issues to help the parents not get triggered and not trigger the other and really effectively deal with their emotions during this difficult process. And they will help them come to a parenting agreement. They will bring their child development expertise and knowledge to the process and help them come to an agreement around what the best plan is for these kids now and in the future. So you don't necessarily need more than one person like that on the team.
Got it. And to be really clear, the coach that is in the so collaborative divorce is a very specific process that doesn't define or describe that you had a collaborative divorce, right? It's literally a process. It's a legal process called collaborative divorce, right? And I want to make sure that that's really clear, that we're not just describing a process. It's actually the name of the legal process.
Yes. And it's not necessarily we're not just being collaborative. We are signing an agreement. It's called a collaborative participation agreement. In New York, it's 6 pages long, the agreement that our clients and the attorneys and all the other professionals will sign. So it addresses everything about how we will be working together, the need for transparency and honesty, all the roles of all the different professionals, about confidentiality, about how the process will end, how the collaborative process will come to an end and what happens at that point. Mm. So 6 pages, and it will also address and what makes it legal is that they're going to sign it and they're going to have their signature notarized. So everything that was in that agreement that can be enforced in a court later if necessary. It's very rare that collaborative cases end up going to court, But if they do, they've agreed to not cancel bank accounts, not cancel insurance, make sure the financial status quo is maintained during this process. So they've agreed to things that a court can enforce later if necessary.
That's great. The other thing to clarify is that the coach in this process is actually not a coach. They're not like me, who's a certified coach. They actually have to be a licensed mental health professional, something that I would love to see expanded, but that's
Yes, that's definitely, that's why I think they've stopped wanting to be called coaches, because they feel they do, it's not just coaching.
It's not, right? It's not just coaching. I mean, there is a lot, and I know there's a lot of coaching involved in it, but yeah, I think there's confusion. I'm speaking on a panel in next week, the Southern California Mediators Association, about what a divorce coach does. And the first thing that we're talking about is differentiating us from the collaborative coaches, because most people, I think, in the divorce, certainly mediation world, when they hear of divorce coach, they think of it in terms of the collaborative process, but we're not the same, and they're not us, we're not them. And we do different things. Right. So I just think that for people who listen to this podcast, it's important because they know that I'm a divorce coach, but that's not, but I don't do collaborative.
Right. You do so many of the same things. You help people get out of their own way, process their feelings, be pragmatic, really filter things in a different way. Like collaborative coaches will help with all that. And they have different mental health training and child development training, so they can really dig in to the family system and the family dynamics in a different way.
Yep.
But that's the only difference.
Yeah, totally. I just want to clarify that.
Sure. Good to clarify.
Just for my audience. So how did you get in? I mean, how did you become a collaborative attorney, or like what made you decide that this was the place that you wanted to kind of reside in your practice? Are you like so many divorce attorneys that I know who are like, I can't do family law anymore, I gotta get the hell out?
Yeah, I went through that for sure. About 7 years into practicing law, and I've been practicing law 27 years now, and I've been doing family law the whole time. And about 7 years in, I really didn't think I wanted to be a lawyer anymore. I was a traditional divorce attorney, going to court, trying to settle my cases, realizing court was a terrible place to be, but I didn't know anything else. So just use that process as best as I could for my clients. And I stopped practicing law for a couple of years. I tried legal recruiting. I tried to go to a different industry. And then I missed using my lawyer brain. Mm-hmm. And I went back to practicing law and back right into family law. And a few years after that, I was at a New York City bar presentation, and somebody came in to talk about collaborative divorce, and I had never heard of it before. But Kate, it was like a light just shined down on this long conference table that I was sitting at, and there was this path. I've never experienced anything like it. I looked around the room like at this all these other divorce lawyers, and I'm like, is everyone else so as excited as me to know that you can work with other attorneys and help your clients in a way that will help them really come to a good solution? And is everyone else hearing this? And all the people are just sitting around with their chin on their hands, like bored out of their minds. And I guess it changed my life that day. It didn't change many other people's in that room, I guess. But
bummer for them, because they're still litigating, right? Like they're like, why? Yeah. Well, and I think that's a great way of sort of separating the wheat from the chaff, right? Like, people who are inspired by this, people who are not inspired by this, are like true litigators, and they want to keep divorce in the litigation system for whatever reason, usually greed and financial gain, right? And people who are inspired by other ways of doing this are actually, in my opinion, more committed to their clients and in my world, like to their clients' children, really,
the family
itself.
Yeah. And the thing about divorce, we always see it as the breaking up of a family. And that's what it felt like when my own parents got divorced, it was so sad. And it doesn't have to be that way. And the collaborative professionals get that. Just because your marriage is ending, your family doesn't stop. You still have the family. And if you can protect that and divorce in a better way that's really looking at what's important to each of you and bringing respect to the process and having the professionals model the kind of behavior and words and actions that you would hope the clients will have and be able to use and express, then you're going to have a much better outcome long term. Everyone's going to be better off.
I love that idea that divorce professionals in the room are actually modeling something to the clients, because we really are. I think when we're getting divorced, when we're in the midst of our divorce, we are kind of looking to the adults in the room to tell us how to do it. And if the adults in the room are litigators and they're committed to an adversarial process that is literally by definition adversarial. I was talking to Susan Guthrie about this the other day about, mediation, right? And like the difference between mediation and litigation. And she was talking about how using like all the language that's used in litigation, like first, like down to like, so-and-so versus so-and-so, you serve them papers, you write like all of the language.
Right. The other attorney in litigation is your adversary.
Right.
In the collaborative, I call them my collaborative colleagues.
Yeah.
The other attorney is my collaborative colleague.
Right.
It's a very different mindset. Sometimes we'll be and we're human, right? So there, you're in a room, the other professionals might say something that's you don't agree with or is really like triggers something.
Yeah.
But instead of jumping on it or accusing them of saying something, purposely to hurt you in some way, I roll my eyes. I won't. I'll do my best, humanly best, to control my emotions, even though I've been triggered in some way or something happened, and then later talk to my collaborative colleague outside the room. When you said ABC, I could see the look on my client's face really affected him. It really didn't go well there, or I didn't agree with you, but let's talk about it outside. And maybe then we'll come back in the room and we'll be transparent about the conversation we just had, but in an adult way.
Exactly. And that's exactly right. That is the model that, that we want for the client. And so it really, like litigation, I think there's a time and place for litigation for sure. And that's really, as far as I can tell, only if one person is really hell bent on it. I have clients who are trying to go mediation and their spouses are hell bent on litigation and getting shark attorneys. And at that point I say, go get yourself a shark, because you can't bring a rubber club to a knife fight or a gun fight, but other than that, we want to model that. And when you are really, as the attorneys or mediators, setting the tone. You're setting the tone for the whole thing by the behavior in the room overall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do a lot of work with each other in the room, with the outside, like in our collaborative meetings, we'll process these difficult cases that we're having. We talk about it.
Yeah.
It's such a much more supportive community for the attorneys, for the other professionals, that the clients never see. We do so much more work on ourselves so that we can be better professionals for these divorcing clients that are going through one of the most difficult times in their life, and they can't afford to have us be taking things personally and not being self-aware.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So how do you know whether you should mediate or do collaborative divorce? Like, is there like a profile that would be better suited for one or the other?
What I generally see or say is that when there's a couple, look, everyone should try to mediate if they can. It's definitely less expensive. It'll probably take less time if it's the right process for you. It might not be the right process if there is a very large power imbalance between you. It could be a verbal power imbalance. no one's trying to overcome someone else. Just you might process and hear and speak very differently, and you're not going to communicate well. It could be a financial power imbalance, an intellectual power imbalance. It could be an emotional power imbalance. But if no relationship is completely equal. But if the imbalance is too great, it might be hard for one person to advocate for themselves in some way. So if you're not going to be able to properly advocate for yourself and say what's true and what you need and what's important to you, and not just give in or not overwhelm the other person, then mediation will not be the process that you hope it will be. It will be very difficult. It might even fail. Mm-hmm. So if those imbalances are very obvious, then you probably need more support. It'll be better for both of you to have an advocate in the room with you and to have the team around you. And then the balance, everything gets balanced out a bit. So that's definitely one thing that I see.
Okay. Was there another? Sorry.
No, that's like the major. That's the major.
Yeah.
Thing
no, I think that's actually a really interesting. It's an interesting point. Do you think that imbalance? Would you say that if one, like a stay-at-home mom, is that kind of imbalance?
Not necessarily.
Okay. So it's not necessarily a financial imbalance. It's really like a power dynamic. So it sounds more emotional.
I'm aware of some clients where the wife has never worked, but very intelligent, handles most of the, leads most of the financial discussions throughout the marriage, encourages the husband to go to the financial advisors, manages the money that's coming in that he's earning. And the husband's very passive and doesn't really care that much about things and just let the wife handle everything. That's a power imbalance, regardless of who's making the money. And their mediation has not gone as smoothly as you would hope because there's a lot of passivity. So things don't move. That's the other thing with mediation. You both have to be motivated. If one person's not quite as motivated as the other, they might need that attorney, that collaborative attorney, to kind of push them a little bit to stay in the process or pull them back so they're not running too far ahead.
They're not like overly aggressive in the process.
Or just look, I've been one person's sometimes thinking about the divorce for 2 years.
Yeah.
And then the other person's like, what do you mean you want a divorce? I had no idea we were unhappy. So, Mr. 2-year wanting a divorce is going to want it to be done next month. And, the other partner or the other spouse is like, slow down. I am not ready to deal with this yet. I have
not processed it yet. I talk about that all the time.
Mediation probably will be very difficult for that couple too. There's an imbalance in time.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And I talk about that all the time with anybody, right? That we finally come to the decision and then we're like, okay, let's go, let's do this. And it's a terrible idea, right? We need some time for the emotional stuff to wear off because I always say this, making the biggest legal and financial decisions of your life in the middle of the biggest emotional upheaval in your life is a really bad idea. So let's come down off the emotional upheaval before making the legal and financial decisions. And the same thing where exactly as you say, like one person has known this is coming, the other person is totally blindsided. Their emotional state is a lot more heightened than the other. And we don't want that in mediation, in litigation, in collaborative, right? It's just all a bad combo.
And when processes go on too long because you didn't pick the right process, and it's like, it's not always black and white, but some divorces go on for so long, and then the couple becomes exhausted, or frustrated, and then bad decisions are made because of those two things. Someone ends up just giving it all away. Sure, I don't need any money. Just get me out of this marriage. And then a year later, they're like, "Oh no, what did I do? I gave too much up. I didn't wait it out." And
hear us now. Don't ever do that. Anyone listening who's thinking like, "I don't want anything. I just want him gone." Like, no, no, take some time to process through whatever it is that is making you feel like you just want them gone, and be smarter about it and be more strategic. Yes. Because
call Kate, call your therapist, call somebody to help you process all this. It's painful. We know you want to rip that Band-Aid off, but it's not going to be worth it in the long run.
It's really
not. Slow it down. It's
really not. I'm one of those. I get in the pool real slow. I get in the cold, like ice cold water, super slow. I don't dive right in. Take a page from that book. You have an interesting story, about your parents that I would love for you to tell our listeners, because I think it informs so much of what you do and why you do it.
Yeah, sure. So my parents had a very unhappy marriage, I would imagine, from the very, very beginning. And I always knew they were unhappy, and they just stayed together. And they finally divorced when my mom made the decision to just leave, basically. And when I was in college. I was actually on my semester abroad when I got the call. I've left your dad. So they hired traditional lawyers, and they filed those initial papers in court, but they ultimately settled out of court. But the process of those, just because they originally went to court and they had to make all these allegations against each other, because back then you had to prove,
right?
Excuse me?
Yeah, that's the only way. That was the only way to do it.
Yeah, you had to prove. In my parents' case, because I only found these papers after my dad passed away, that my mom had to make all these allegations of cruel and inhuman treatment against my dad. So I found this legal pad with 16 handwritten pages that my dad was answering all my mom's allegations. He kept all these years. Wow. I never knew why he was so angry at my mother after the divorce. He got the houses. She got the business. They shared custody of my brother. It looked equal to me. And he wouldn't talk to my mother for 10 years after that divorce. 10 years. He wouldn't say her name. He wouldn't look at her in pictures. He wouldn't be in photographs at my sister's wedding. It was terrible having to navigate parents that my mother would have talked to him, but my father wouldn't talk to my mother. When I found this legal pad with all these allegations and then him defending himself, I realized, how painful it was for him to be accused of all these things, and probably for my mom to have to dig up all this crap from a 20-something year marriage.
Right.
So it made me realize, I've been doing this, I had been a divorce lawyer for a long time at that point, but I realized more than ever that it was the process of the divorce, how they divorced, the things they had to say about each other, the things they were encouraged to think about and dig up, that ruined it. That just put a nail in the coffin, because there was really nothing else to be said. Well, it was just too much, too much to have to deal with. My father was in a fragile state anyway. So it really affected our family, and I just don't want other families to go through that. I don't want my clients to have to tell me every terrible thing their spouse ever did to them. That's the past. What can the future look like? Yeah. And it just really drove that home for me.
And, I think that's so important, right? It's like unpacking those boxes of all the shit that happened in the divorce and healing those wounds for ourselves is part of the divorce process, but it is not part of the legal process of divorce. And, that's why I do the work that I do, because I help you unpack those boxes before you even get there or during it, right? So that those emotional boxes don't get carried in. And I think that the divorce law across the country is shifting in that I think every state now is a no-fault state, right? We don't have to prove infidelity or, name some cause. You can just get divorced for irreconcilable differences and be done with it, right? And thank God, but even in I think New York State was very recent.
We were the last state.
You were right. Yes. New York was the
10 years ago. Yeah.
And And up until 10 years ago, you had to do that. And your poor dad, right? Can you imagine? So it's one thing, it's interesting from a perspective shift, right? Because if you're just in the perspective of watching your dad be bitter and angry, you're like, what the fuck? Why can't he just get over it? But then when you actually have the evidence and are afforded the sort of window into what happened, I can imagine that was a huge shift for you in compassion and empathy, that this poor man had this 20-year marriage that by all accounts he seemed to think was like okay, or he was willing to stay in, right? But he had 20 years that was reduced to these allegations.
Yes. And also I felt bad for my mom that she had to write it all out and bring it all up too.
Right.
You know, I never talked to her about, she might hear this on this podcast. I don't know. I never even told her I found that pad. Hi, Mom, I have the pad. But, you know, I had to think about her attorney sending her home and saying, all right, this is your homework. Go think about every terrible thing he ever did. I mean, who wants to do that? Why do we have to encourage our clients to do that? And even though we don't have fault divorce anymore, it still happens. Tell me every terrible, how did he not take care of the kids the right way? He wasn't honest about something once. That means you can't trust him about any kind of money or financial accounting, you know?
Yeah. And this is what litigation does.
Yes.
And I tell the story a lot about how before we went into the collaborative process, I went and saw a litigator because I didn't know I just wanted to know what the lay of the land was. Someone was like, you should just at least consult with an attorney so you know what it is that you're going into, you know. And I was like, all right. And I go in and I meet with this guy. And the first thing he did was say like, well, we should, accuse your husband of being, if we can prove that he's an unfit father, then we can get you more custody so that, and I was like, but wait, I don't want to do that. He's a great dad. My son, like, they have a wonderful relationship. And he's like, well, then, so you could get more money. And I was like, but I don't need more. I don't want more money. That's not what this is about. This is about my son. And I realized that had I been a little bit more angry, had I been a little bit more vengeful, had I been a little bit more resentful, I could easily have gotten sort of swayed in that direction. But because I had processed my feelings through years of therapy and individual and couples and all of the stuff, I wasn't susceptible to becoming a victim of that. And that is still very much alive. And that was in California 10 years ago. But, that's still very well. I mean, look at Marriage Story.
Right.
That's, a perfect example of what we're talking about.
Perfect example. It was really hard to watch that movie
Ooh.
For that reason, because this couple didn't have to go there. And the attorneys just encouraged them to dig all that stuff up. Yeah.
It's funny. I haven't talked about that on the podcast yet because there's so much to talk about. But I mean, I think it's a great, that Scarlett Johansson's character was really emotional and really susceptible. And Laura Dern's character, I think, used a lot of feminist psychology or sort of tenets of feminism that were actually really valid. Like those speeches, her two speeches about feminism and women and what they give up and how she hit, like, all, I was like, fuck yeah. And then she used that as a way to manipulate her into litigation.
Yeah.
And that's what I think was so brilliant about those scenes was that it gets you can see it. You're like, yeah. And then like, oh, no.
Don't go there. Right. Litigation attorneys want to be seen as like the knight in shining armor. I can protect you. I can give you that power that you're entitled to. I can get it back for you. You've given it up. Let me take care of you.
And as soon as you use the word protect, what it means is that there's something to protect against. It immediately creates a villain.
Correct. And this couple, and even at the end of that movie, the scene that really got me was when the husband moves out to California, and when he's in California, they agree that he'll have 50-50 custody when he's in California.
Mm-hmm.
And Laura Dern says something like, "Oh no,
yeah,
he only gets 40%."
Uh-huh.
And Scarlett Johansson's character says, "What do you mean? We agreed 50." He goes, "I didn't want him telling his buddies that he got 50, equal custody." Like she took it personally. She wasn't going to let him win.
Right.
Even though her client clearly wanted this.
Yes.
So
and
if I know better than you, let me, just let me take care of it. You don't know what you're doing, little lady.
Yeah. Well, and that fortunately was the moment that her client was like, "Oh, I'm not doing this."
Yeah.
That was the moment of clarity.
Finally.
Yeah. I mean, it's so, I mean, I just say, I always say it's like, it's a cautionary tale that everybody should see. It's hard to watch. It's brilliantly done, and it's important. I think it's an important cautionary tale. How do you get someone, how do you suggest sort of talking to someone if their spouse, if one party is interested in using collaborative, but the other person is maybe thinking that they need to go to litigation because that's all they actually know, or, someone's in their ear telling them that they need to be protected. How do you suggest someone actually talks to their soon-to-be ex or ex about collaborative?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's so common. It's not that, what isn't that common is a client calls and says, "My spouse and I have decided we'd like collaborative." That happens, but not all that often. It's usually I'm educating my client about the process. And we talk about it and they say, "This sounds like what would work." So what I will tell them is, okay, this is why what you've told me is important to you. You've told me about your kids. You've told me about the relationship you want to preserve with your spouse and the concerns that you have about why mediation might not be the right process. The idea of having these other professionals could really help you because of whatever complicated or kind of in-depth issues that will have to be kind of examined and sorted out. So let's make a list of all the things that you found are appealing about this process, and then you should go talk to your spouse. I have an article that I give them about how to talk to your spouse about about collaborative divorce.
Oh, cool.
I'll send them home with that, and they will have that conversation. Another option that I tell them is, if you have the conversation and they're still not quite on board, or what happens is they've already chosen a lawyer who's not a collaborative lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And the lawyer says, we're not going to litigate, but they're not collaboratively trained. Well, we can't use the collaborative process in that case. They have to be collaboratively trained.
Right. Yeah.
So
right.
I'll say, well, an idea that is that you go sit down, make an appointment with one of our divorce family specialists, divorce coaches, and make an appointment for the two of you to go see this person and hear about the process from a child-centric point of view, from an emotional point of view. So you're hearing the information at the same time. And then if you like this person, you've got your coach on board. Now you just have to now you have me as your attorney. Your spouse just has to go find an attorney that feels right to them. And there you have and that's happened. It's worked several times recently. And that really helps because it's not coming from me. It's not coming from the spouse that they don't know if they should trust right now. It's coming from a neutral professional.
From a therapist
a therapist, basically.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. I love that. That's a smart, very smart. Thank you, Andrea.
You're welcome.
You have your certificate in positive psychology. So how does that apply, and how do you use a positive, first of all, what is positive psychology? Because we've actually never done an episode on positive psychology. So can you talk about that a little bit and how that plays into your work as a collaborative professional?
Yeah, so positive psychology is sometimes called the psychology of happiness. So traditional psychology is generally focused on what's not working, what's wrong, and how to fix it and how to make it better. And positive psychology, this is very basic way of explaining it, is focused on what's working, where your strengths are, what going well, so that you can have more of it in your life, and focus on being happier and being better off with whatever the strengths are. So we're going to focus on having a growth mindset, for example. That's a big part of positive psychology, not to think in a more fixed mindset, but to think more bigger and more globally, and how to expand what you see. We're going to focus on mindfulness. That's really important. We studied resilience, how to be more resilient, who's more resilient and how to become more resilient in your life, and how you'll have a better outcome and more happiness. Let's see, what else? I'm having a little brain freeze here. I think what I help my clients with is to really understand I'll have conversations with them. What's working in your relationship rather than what's wrong? Where are you doing well together? Where are you parenting well? What are your conversations like around the kids? Why do you have trust in that area? So let's build on that when we have the financial conversation.
Yes. Yes.
How can let's focus on how you can be more resilient when things don't go your way. I'll encourage them to work with other professionals, of course, to help build on all these things. But and mindfulness and meditation, and, we want to bring that in. We want to get centered, so that we could just be more present when we're making these difficult decisions. So it helps me in my own life, and it helped me, I think, be a better lawyer for my clients.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's such a great pairing. I think I think it's really interesting. I think it's actually really unique for an attorney, although maybe it's becoming more common that people have this sort of, mindfulness training and mindful approach to this process. Because I think we've all seen what happens when we don't.
Yes.
You're right.
Yes.
That's great.
That the fight or flight syndrome, the freeze, your brain, is when it's under stress it's not acting optimally. So we have to manage it.
Yeah. We do. I'm so glad that we had this conversation. Is there anything else that you want to leave people with about collaborative, about how to choose a collaborative approach? I don't know anything.
Well, I would just encourage people to think of court as your last resort. And if you end up going to an attorney, like you just said, Kate, where they're like, oh, well, we're going to, I'll accuse him of being this or that. Really listen to your gut. Is this really the kind of, you probably didn't marry a monster. He's just not right for you anymore. Right. So you have to remember that, and don't let other attorneys or anyone try to convince you otherwise when you know in your heart what's true. Stay out of court. It is the worst place for families. You'll lose all control, all privacy, time, money. Your relationship will probably never recover. It might end up worse than it is today. And who is that going to help? Your kids could get drawn into the fight. That should only be for the most extreme circumstances that you have a judge make a decision for your family. So I believe that with all my heart, and just interview lawyers who can talk to you about different processes and understand them and have practiced them and can really tell you what's what, and then follow your gut.
Do you think that somebody who is in an emotionally abusive marriage can benefit from collaborative? Do you think that's a good place for them to be? I mean, mediation is probably not, given that imbalance, that your power imbalance that you're talking about. What about collaborative?
Collaborative is definitely, collaborative cases help high conflict couples come to agreements in a productive way, a safe way, and allows for both of them to be stable and secure on the other side. So high conflict often means, there's some emotional, it's usually not physical, it's usually emotional.
Yeah.
It's not abuse, just a lot of nastiness, and just, it's not healthy, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But the team helps to balance that out, helps to calm that down, doesn't inflame that emotional abuse. And that's what attorneys, even when they're not intending to, do, because that's the process.
Absolutely.
So emotionally abusive, it depends on how extreme it is. But if it's just kind of everyday emotional abuse,
average,
the end of a marriage,
toxic masculinity kind of thing, like
exactly. Sure, we can handle that.
You guys, so you can do that. You can handle that. Okay,
can handle that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my listeners are in that place, and so I just always want to ask that.
I say, what do you want the other side? Is there still a glimmer of the person you married? Is he still or she still a good parent? Is it just your relationship that's toxic? But maybe it doesn't mean it's completely that there's no hope for it.
Right.
And maybe you can have a different relationship on the other side when your family is reformed and the marriage is removed from the family.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, that was my case for sure. Was that we were toxic, but he's a great dad.
Very common, right?
Yeah, very common. Yeah, and you have to be able to separate yourself out from that and see that objectively and clearly.
Yes, and maybe he wasn't a great dad during your toxic marriage because you can't stand being in the same room together.
Yeah.
And you end up doing everything, and he's in his room or he doesn't come home because you two can't stand each other.
Right.
So he doesn't have a chance to parent the way he would like to, or you would want him to, or you're begging him to.
Right.
Because of all these other reasons. And
right.
A lot of times women are like, oh, he never wanted to be with the kids. Now he wants 50-50. Well, yeah, I hear that a lot.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Yeah, maybe he doesn't want to be around you and you don't want to be around him. And so he's not showing up to parent because it's all kinds of bad. That's a really good point. That's a super great point. Andrea, where can people find you?
So I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and my website is vaccalaw.com, NewYorkDivorceLawyerBlog.com, where all my blogs and videos are, and that's where I am.
There you are. Awesome. Thank you so much for lending your expertise so generously to my audience. I know that this is actually going to be a really important episode, very enlightening for people. So really important. Thank you for coming on.
And on my website, you can get my ebook too, if it interests you. So Divorce Without Court, How to Have a More Peaceful Divorce. So
yes, and we were going to be linking that in the show notes as well. So is that on the Vacca Law website or the other one?
It's on my blog and website, so you can get it anywhere.
Either one. Good. Perfect. Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Kate. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. If you like what you hear, head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen in and leave me a review. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at the Divorce Survival Guide. I'll see you next time, and until then, remember, you, my love, deserve to be happy.